Okay. Thank you everyone for coming tonight to the DevOps Live meetup. Before we get started, I have two brief announcements. One of them is that the CFP for All Day DevOps, which is an online conference, it's already open. So if you're interested in submitting a presentation for the All Day DevOps, which it's presented globally online. That's happening, I think, in November. I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, it's November 6th. But I could post the date on the meetup. But the CFP is already open, so you can go out and submit a presentation, and then if you're selected, you'll be notified. The other one is that DevOps Days Dallas, it's already been published. So we're coming again to Dallas. It's going to be over at the Plano Event Center. And the dates are going to be, I believe it's April and August. What are the dates? August 21 and 22?
I think the Thursday.
Yeah.
Thursday.
Yeah, it's a Wednesday.
Tuesday, Wednesday.
Tuesday, Wednesday, August 21 and 22. So, watch the website, go to devopsdays.org, search for Dallas, and all the details will be there for registration, for CFP when it comes open, and everything like that.
The date and the location is posted on the website.
Yeah, it's posted on the website. It's the Plano Event Center. So, it's a new location. So, tonight, we're happy. I want to thank both Datadog for sponsoring the site at Weaveworks, and also to GitLab, who's going to be presenting tonight for sponsoring the food. And tonight we have Joel. He's going to be talking to us about resetting your culture for cloud native success. So without further ado, I'm going to leave it here to Joel.
All right. All right, so a couple things you need to know up front. Just because we brought pizza tonight does not mean that I'm beating you over the head with anything GitLab related. I'm trying to keep it out of the tool entirely tonight. Okay? The other thing is, I realized as I stared at the title, I'm not actually talking about this tonight. Okay, so that's kind of weird. I am talking about it, but at the same time, don't expect me to outline something. This isn't like what Scaled Agile is to the Agile framework, right? I'm not going to outline something for you. This is stories from the front. So I'm Joel Kruzwick. I am the Solution Architects Manager at GitLab, which means pre-sales management. So I have a team of 14 people. We cover North America. And we are the front lines of communication with our customer base. And as such, we hear lots of interesting things. I've been doing this over 18 months, and the reality is every day has been just a little bit different, right? There have been, I tell this to people that interview all the time at GitLab, there are no 2 days alike in this role. You need to like change if you want to come on board. And that's where we kind of separate out the folks who are applying for roles. Some of them just go, yeah, okay, I'm out. Most of the time that's not the case, because if you're interested in the DevOps world, you're interested in change. Right, that is what it is. So what I'm going to do tonight is kind of walk you through some stuff. And admittedly, a few of these are my personal statements on cloud native culture and where it's going, based on what I have heard from clients over the last 6 months. Okay, that is the focus of what I'm getting tonight. Okay. So without further ado, I wanted to start here real quick, because I'm not going to hit you with innovation and disruption conversations tonight. Okay, everybody does that. The reality is, if we go back 10 years, though, life was a little different, right? Hey, don't get in the car with strangers. What do we do now? We call strangers and get in the car, right? We tell our kids, call a stranger, get in the car. It's just a thing. Entertainment. The DVR, that was the revolutionary VHS replacement, right? That's the cool thing. I don't DVR anything anymore. I wait for everything to come out and I binge watch on the weekend. Marketing. Print ads. Ads on the internet. Where are we now? Facebook listening to my phone telling me I saw that you searched on Puerto Rico. Here's a VRBO, right? Or augmented reality. Look down the street, see what's available. Do you have anybody has a Retail Me Not app on their phone? That's an interesting one. You walk in, and it says, welcome to the Gap. Here's 15% off. I don't go to the Gap, that's why I'm picking on that, okay? These might be Gap jeans, though, I'm not sure. So that technology morph has forced us to have to work in different ways. Now, we all know this. We all feel this, right? We went through the iterative thing. Go back 10 years, how many organizations were Agile? I don't know. I know that's when I got into it, about 2007. Collaboration. We were meeting after meeting after meeting when I was in 2009, working in an office all the time. I'm now part of a fully remote company. I love it. Has it really changed that I'm now stuck in video meetings back to back to back? I don't know, it seems pretty similar, right? But this has revolutionized things. 10 years ago, what was the dominant platform for communication? Email. And Yahoo Instant Messenger was the dominant app. How far we've come. Thank you, Slack. Thank you, right? I live here every day now. And the last one here is cloud. So I'm a data center guy in my background. I spent years working in data centers and developing software to help understand where everything lived. The cloud just took all that and threw it away in some ways. So what does this all look like? Well, let's start with the culture part. If we go 5-10 years back, okay, we talked a lot about stock picker churning in the past. You've heard people probably talk about this. If you go back to the 50s, a company stayed in the Fortune 500, or they stayed in the Dow, or stayed in the S&P, about 60 years. Average life, when I did a report back in 2000, was around 20 years. We're just under 15 now. What's going on? Traditional ways of working that we fall into, become our tradition, and we get outmoded one after another, right? That's what's happened to these companies. What else happened? Well, I don't know about you. If you walk into a company that says, I need a resource for this call, and that resource is you, does it feel good today? I got used to it 10 years ago. Now we want to be people again, right? This one I thought was interesting. Did some research on this. It's open cultures, not open offices, that are attracting the next generation. Okay, if you're not transparent in what you're doing, we're done with closed door operations. We don't need that anymore. We want transparency in the organization. People talk about the millennial or the Gen Z movement in the marketplace, and what is it with people that won't stick around? That's one of the #1 things is transparency, right? So how's your DevOps culture feel? I'm going to attack that one soon too. So how do we hack that culture? What does it feel like? There's 4 key things that I'm going to point out here that are the key hacks for changing your culture. Immediate gratification, thing 1. You can't tell me you're going to change the culture and have nothing change. Thing 2, emotion. You got to tug at my heartstrings. You got to make me feel the change. Thing 3, it's got to be low effort. If we have to put together a team of people and work on it for a few months, it's probably not a great core value shift, okay? And number 4 is the visibility thing. Transparency is key. Where did I get this? Didn't make it up, I promise. This is something that only you get to see tonight. This is special, okay? It's not something we share publicly. We worked on something with Gartner. They hyper-analyzed DevOps culture with us. Notice the top 2 things here. DevOps composition team is number 3. Okay, this is skill sets. This is who's on the team. Thing number 1 is things like the way the team works together, how they're motivated, the diversity of the mindsets, problem-solving abilities, because we're diverse in how we approach problems, and leadership. We've known for a long time that if you want to transform something at any scale at all, we need leadership buy-in. Same thing here. So when we're talking about culture, we're talking about DevOps, these things are actually hand in hand because we've got the data right here to prove it. And I talked about the culture hack. If you look at culture, it's values and behaviors. It's that sum, and that equals your culture. So if you take your hacks and multiply them times your courage, you can hack your culture, okay? These don't have to be big things. They shouldn't be big things, by the way. Right, we're talking about hacking into our culture. All right, I wanted to start here. Why? Because it's really generic. This isn't really DevOpsy stuff. There's some cool stuff here, but it's not really DevOpsy. Right? So where do we go from here? We wanted to talk a little bit about cloud native, I believe. Here's my premise. Does anybody agree with this? Anybody doing cloud native today that says this is radically different? Okay, cool. Here's why I say it. I've been doing software development for 20 years. I hate saying that. When the two came in front, it's like, I don't really. But for the first time, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, right? But I no longer care where my app lives. I used to buy the server and put it in the rack and know exactly where it went and what my bandwidth requirements were. I knew where my backups were and when that job was going to run. Today, the whole abstracted application thing, it could be anywhere, right? Some availability zone someplace in some data center. I don't know which rack it's in. I focus differently on architecture. I'm going to highlight a couple of different architecture strategies that we've seen recently that are really creative, right? It kind of breaks the mold on, I've got a front end and a back end and they're going to live here. I no longer fixate on availability. This whole idea that I need to focus on my uptime, let somebody else deal with it. I'm good with that. And dependencies and limitations. Now, for those of you who have switched to microservices, you know some of this pain right here, don't you? As soon as you get 150 or 200 of those things going, and they're all interdependent, now you got some pain. But what I'm looking at here is the way the teams rely on each other, right? We had so many teams that would get to a point, and the other team now has to wait for them and idle them out. That's kind of going away in cloud native architectures, if you're doing them right. Is it just another thing? I don't think so, right? Here's the things that I've seen. I really believe this is kind of the progression of things. I've also seen that if you're using legacy tools and process, they don't quite work the same way, which tells me there's a sea change underway. And then, of course, the data center thing we've already talked about. So, if we look at this, how do they set the stage? So, Agile. I worked for Raleigh Software, full disclosure, for like 5 years, right? I was all in on Agile. Today, yeah, I paved the path to cooler stuff, right? I'm still doing Agile stuff, don't get me wrong. But there's been this progression of like, well, it's kind of more continuous flow. Or maybe my iterations have taken a little different form. Even the stuff that I used to teach around quarterly planning has moved to 30-day intervals quietly behind the scenes. They're not advertising it, but the stuff that they talk for 90-day cycles for the longest time is now down to 30. Okay. Things are moving into closer and closer time intervals. So Agile brought us this stuff, right? We all know the picture. Agile brought us this smaller delivery. It kept us focused on the team. I called some of my Agile coach friends, though. 90% of the engagements they're in right now, it's still just a checkbox. They haven't actually changed. If this is one of the foundations of moving to cloud native, are we going to run into more problems? I think so. So let's assume we've got some achievements from Agile. We're doing okay. We got into DevOps, right? And when I look at what DevOps started as and what it is, it's a little murky for me, and this is one of the things that bothers me. We got into DevOps driving more cross-team collaboration, right? What is DevOps? It's Dev and Ops together in perfect harmony, right? It's a beautiful thing. So here's a question for you. How is it that when I try to hire somebody who has a DevOps background, I end up with one of these 4 categories on the other end of the line? What is a DevOps engineer? Where did that come from? That was meant to be collaborative groups of people. And we just siloed it out and built another role around it in a lot of organizations. So, really interesting, right? Like, if we're building the foundation on these things, and this is what I'm running into, where do we go from here? Well, we did get this cool stuff. We got potentially shippable increments that have changed quite a bit. If you're doing cloud native stuff, you know you can ship a lot more faster, right? Smaller chunks. Code ownership is done at lower levels, collaboration, transparency at lower levels. We're closer to the code. We're living closer to the code. And we're automating as a mandate One mistake I'm seeing at scale, we're automating the wrong things sometimes, right? We've got to go back and fix it. That's kind of a key thing. So these are actually pretty good things overall, right? These are pretty successful. What does that feel like, though? Well, when we talk about shippable increments, 9 times out of 10 conversations today are about minimally viable code or minimally viable change, not the minimally viable feature of a couple years ago or the minimally viable product a few years before that. We want to ship these minuscule things into the cloud as much as possible. We talk about code ownership. It was DevOps, then it was DevSecOps, and now it's GitOps and release ops and monitoring ops and BizOps. How long is this thing going to get? Right? It keeps getting longer every week. And then this idea of staying closer to the code together. Like this is a big thing. This is what 9 times out of 10 comes up in my conversations. We want to collaborate better across all the teams. We want this all to be communicated together in one place. How do we get product management and security team in a single place to collaborate on something? Depending on where you work, that's something you may have dreamt about one time after one too many beers. Right. May or may not have worked. All right, so the reason that's really important, and those of you who know Mark Andreessen, he's famous for his software eating the world will eat the world, right? That was his big thing. Software is eating the world. This one kind of quietly snuck in a few years later. The whole cycle time compression thing, the time it takes to go from idea to outcome, is the thing that allows you to skate to where the puck is, not where you thought it was going to go. That whole concept, right? That is reliant on your DevOps implementation. That's reliant on how well you adapt to the cloud native culture. Right? So, what's my first step? Lift and shift, right? Here's why I don't like lift and shift. By the way, AWS Transformational Services might tell you otherwise. If you're part of that whole thing, go with it. They know what they're doing. Just go with it there. Conways Law, right? Most of you probably run up against this. I always need the reminder of what it is. I know I've heard of it. But basically, your architecture is going to look the way your organization talks. Fair enough. So, you know, and I found these funny. I found these online. The credit's not showing up here, but there's a guy's blog. I found this in. I love Microsoft, how there's pistols at each group. It took me a while to catch on to that one.
That's fun.
So the question is, what happens if you just lift and shift and take your existing app and put it in the cloud? 75% of people say it costs them more money. 50% of people said their application slowed down. And what about if you've got a whole pile of years of technical debt and you put it in the cloud? Good luck, because it's just going to slow you down further, okay? Does this actually work? Yes, under the right circumstances, under the right guidance. But one of the requests I get all the time is, can you just put this thing in the cloud? The answer is, I wouldn't do that, right? I want you to think fundamentally different. When I talk about fundamentally different, let's take some lessons from Mr. Jeff Foxworthy, first of all. You might not be cloud native if you want to deploy your serverless architecture with Rational. Okay? It really wasn't built for that. Talk to someone who tried this. It did not go well for them. You think containers are for leftovers? Docker and Kubernetes remind you got to fix your boat. Kubernetes is the Greek word for captain, for those of you not in. Somebody says AWS, you check your prime delivery status. Not the right thing. This is the one that I lived for a long time. I was waiting 90 days for IT to get me my servers. Right? It's a common thing. So if you've got these scenarios in your head, you might be cloud native. So what does it take to make the shift? And this is where I want to make a case for like 4 different thought processes to drive a cultural shift. First one is focus. You got to shift your focus. Focus less on releases and more on your deploys. The release has become the new loaded term. What is a release? I asked everybody in this room, everybody answered differently on a wager, right? What are you planning as a release? When are you deploying? Separate it out, focus on the deploy things. Let's get code into that production environment, get it running, and see what happens. Does it have to be active? Does it have to be on? No, of course not. But we want to get it out there. We talked about the minimally viable change thing, right? Smaller and smaller and smaller chunks. Focus less on architecture, more on value. Talk about that one more in a little bit. For the longest time, the argument was we're spending too much time maintaining our tools. We're not spending enough time creating value. That has shifted to we're spending so long architecting and re-architecting our platforms that we're not producing enough value. And if you've been through those exercises, I have a 4-month re-architecting. When your database folds at 50,000 items, that's a bad thing. When your customer finds it, it's worse. And I live that scenario. We want to get out of that world. And cloud native lets us hit the escape button and go. It really does. Focus less on what's worked till now. What happens if you focus on what's worked up till now? You're not going to be in the Dow very long. That's what answers, right? Every day we've got a competition channel in our Slack, and it's constantly flamed up with new stuff every day. I try to keep up with it. I can barely keep up with the stream of new products coming every day. Everybody's got a new approach. I'll talk about a couple of them in a minute. And then focus on cloud education. That's the other thing. I started at GitLab with no AWS experience and no GCP experience. And I tried to make a go of it with no formal education. Can I tell you who's been studying for AWS certifications? Right? There are so many offerings and they work so differently. They have so many features and functions and capabilities and limitations that you have to follow. That's been one of the biggest struggles for me is figuring out where those limitations lie. Things like, hey, your serverless function can only run for 90 seconds and you can only pass it in 2 minutes or whatever that number is worth of data. That doesn't work for what I want to do with it. I don't know. We have a similar problem with some of the storage solutions that just aren't quite fast enough. Their IOPS are a little bit low for us. So just some stuff. Education is a huge part of that. Secondly, I want you to think like a bank. If you talk to a bank today, what do they tell you they are? If you go to this, FDIC certified, right? And because of that, they don't really have to think about their money as much. They need to focus on tech all the time. If you go to Chase and you ask them, they're a technology company. They'll tell you that all day long. The CEO said that in his last press release. So, to think like a bank, the last thing you want to do is lose somebody's deposit. All right? You don't want to lose any data. You don't want to lose anything to go wrong. You don't want to be a headline. Thank you, Marriott, for causing me some wonderful complications in your last data leak. I appreciate that. Okay? I don't want you to be a headline. Test every single commit. Find a way to do it. Make it secure. Because here's what's happening. All the conversations I'm having, we're kicking the security can down the road until we're doing system level stuff, staging level runs, whatever. Okay? We're finding things too late because it's too expensive to run this off. That's the thing I keep hearing. It's per line of code. It's just too expensive. We can't afford to do it. Find a way. There's other tools out there. there's other tools out there that do this stuff. But here's the thing. The worst case of this that I heard recently was somebody that built in. They weren't looking at the license management closely. They built around some open source software that made their code public in the licensing model. They caught it right before it went into production. And they now had to unwind the clock for weeks around that and try to find an adequate solution to now re-architect that solution. You don't want to be there. So please secure all the time. Second thing is performance monitoring. This is something that I think is interesting. We do a lot of performance monitoring in production on our server sets, right? We're watching. Operations is always watching. There are new tools available. I'm thinking Prometheus, Grafana. There's some great tools out there to watch stuff. You can spin up performance monitoring more. I just wanted to see what you do. I wanted to see if I could get a data dog. Okay. We need more data sooner. Right? When we make a commit and something goes wrong, we need to know about it. If your last commit sent your CPU randomization up to the right, you should be able to figure that out before you get out to the staging environments. Okay? Auto-scaling technology and automated backups. These are my favorite things on Earth. I love this. Right? Kubernetes is my friend. It's my friend. I just love it. Docker machine, I love it. I'll put that out there. Okay. Automated backups. There's a lot of the cloud stuff, the cloud products that allow you to take advantage of cloud scale, just thresholds of compute, and automated backups, where I no longer have to create my cron jobs. This stuff is happening automatically, replicating to other zones, and all kinds of fabulous things for us. So this is what the banks are thinking about. They have to think about this, because the performance thing and the auto-scaling thing, come Black Friday, that's got to be dialed in. I work with Visa quite a while, and they have some really interesting stuff that they do. Right? No commits 2 weeks before Black Friday. So interesting to see how the banks are doing this today. So here's what I'm going to tell you, a couple stories. I want you to stop thinking locally, right? If you were a data center person like I was, your first tendency is to go, I got to get to the server. I got to hop online and get into the device and see what's wrong with it. I got to jump into my Kubernetes logs. Right? How's that pod doing anyway? How many of you play with Kubernetes in the self-healing? Watch the pods. Yeah, exactly. So this is one of my favorite things, right? Is watching these things. Oh, wait, hold on. Nope, there's supposed to be 2 pods there. There's only one. Okay, it just kind of works. That kind of thing is leapfrogging in the marketplace. People who are able to leverage it and those who are not, from an uptime perspective. It's really, really making a difference. I'm starting to see the separation of people who are leveraging this and folks who aren't. Same thing with the global approach. With all the new EMEA data laws and with all of the performance issues that I hear constantly cited coming from Asia, primarily, we have to be thinking more global than we are. Cloud native makes this so much easier. I can deploy different nodes of my application across the globe in minutes. So the bigger problem there, of course, being things like, well, where is my data stored to? Where does Europe want it stored? Not here. Right? So these are the kind of things that make that cloud native can do for us pretty easily. Stateless protocols. So this whole idea of treating each request independently, I talked about the architecture thing earlier. I ran into this scenario a couple weeks ago where somebody said they were trying to deal with the regulatory compliance stuff, right, for the European Union. In order to work around that, what they did is they started up, anybody who started sessions from those regions, they literally are firing up independent databases for each session now, storing those people's data in independent databases in the cloud. I've never thought of it that way. I've never seen it done that way. I've seen logically separated databases. I've seen giant databases where we have everything tucked away in various places, or separate databases, right, from different geos, or filtering traffic. They're just firing up little pockets all over the place. And since most of their stuff was not long-term data, they just tore it down when they were done. So now they saved on compute too. Right? I've never seen a model like that. That's what cloud native opens for us, is the ephemeral environment thing. Smaller, cheaper, faster. And then the second one is like unto it, right? When we talk about web sessions, historically, when we talk about session storage, we're talking about a lot of different people, and you have to keep everything perfectly in sync. This whole idea of the token saves you in environments where, well, let's say I'm flying to London. GoGo has created a new conundrum for us, right? Now I'm communicating via satellites in the air. Where does my traffic go? How often do I want to sync that traffic, knowing how much latency that I'm going to have? If I'm using tokens, I only have a few updates in my data that I have to make. It's a far more sporadic thing versus all the syncing that I have to do across session storage. It's just a different way of working. It's not a huge difference, but those little pieces like that really can accelerate what you can do in cloud-native environments. So we can design for this. But you know, this is what got me. When I started doing these studies on actual implementations, I stopped for a minute and said, well, how would I design that myself? Based on what I've done to date, I wouldn't have thought of this. No way. That's, and, you know, this enables us to do something different. All right, here's thing 4. I want you to think about the service, not the tool, right? For the longest time, Americans have bought automobiles. What is starting to happen? Uber and Lyft have eroded car ownership already in the US. That's why GM bought into Lyft. Same thing is happening here. Leveraging these items properly as services, but the average tool set for the average environment to go from idea to production is 40 tools. That's what we found. There are 40 different tools in place, okay? There's a lot of different cloud offerings available, but they do snap together pretty well. So when you're talking about stuff like this, if you deploy the app correctly into the cloud, your uptime should be at 4 nines. You should be saving money. You should be deploying smaller chunks that shrink in significance. You don't bring things down. You're not designing specifically for scaling. Granted, design is still required, but you're not sitting there going, okay, what's my Black Friday event? And if you are, you're using a service to manage that. Out of all these things, though, at the end of the day, it all comes to this. And this is the biggest thing of all. Team autonomy is that natural byproduct. Teams can work better, faster, and basically more by themselves. They're not dependent as much on each other if you've got this happening correctly. And I point to service meshes as my prime example of that, right? If you're leveraging service message that mesh heads correctly, this becomes a huge thing. Because now we're designing for communication, not necessarily for architecture. Okay, I talked to a friend of mine who's actually at a mesh company, and he was telling me, he said, you know, we've got ways to take the oldest app you have and integrate that with all of the newer stuff you got, all your microservices architectures. And you want to tie in serverless to that too? Yeah, whatever, go ahead. It's the master bus. It's this big beast of a thing that ties our worlds together. The team just has to feed the beast. And that's what's really cool about where this is going. By the way, when I look at this stuff and I think about AWS, and I'll mention them as like 70% of my conversations, right? They are the big boss on the block. Have you given any thought to where they came from? Why is AWS so much of the market? 3 years ago, I did a presentation, and it included how many commits Amazon makes to their website in an average day. I didn't think too much about it back then, but it was once every 11 seconds. Today, there's 2 to 3 commits per second on Amazon.com. When was the last time you went to Amazon.com and it was down? They figured it out. That's why they're selling it to us, right? It's great. Like they have figured this out, and they're pushing so much code all the time. Now, is it different for them? Yeah, potentially, right? Because they're just kicking new products up and rolling out new processes. But the reality is, that's where a lot of these gains are coming from. And they're setting a new tone in the marketplace. And based on the market share that they're stealing from other retailers, I would say it's working. And to me, that's demonstrating the importance of this, right? That was something like when I started putting this together, I didn't have these thoughts. The deeper I get into it, the more I see that. So what's the cultural impact of all this stuff? Well, loosely coupled, architecturally abstracted apps are changing how the teams work. We just want to communicate efficiently. And then the second one there is cultural clashes. We have been hiring like crazy at GitLab. I came in, I was employee 150. We hit 530 last week. And most of that came within the last 8 months. That's a lot of new people. But spending my time talking to people, There is something to this, the way that you approach things. I'm trying to bring diversity to the team on hiring. And the diversity is not necessarily what you're traditionally thinking of as diversity. I'll talk to that. We are not a cloud-native company. GitLab is. Okay? I'll say that now. Our application is not a microservices-based cloud-native application. We lifted and shifted and tweaked a lot. These are the core values we have, though. I found it very, very well aligned to what you do in the cloud-native world. Here's why. Okay? Here's how we leverage our core values. One is we work asynchronously. So we are in 53 countries around the world. It is truly a 24/7 shop for software. If you've got 53 countries that you're working in, you're getting a lot of different inputs all day long. And keeping up with that can be tough. So organizing everything in an asynchronous way keeps us moving well. By the way, that also staggers your CI jobs nicely. Just put that out there. We watch the peaks every day when people get online and then when they check out and commit their code at the end of the day. It's kind of fun to watch. Second thing is tracking outcomes, not hours. Too many people I talk to say, man, I've been working on this for 11 hours. Yeah. What's it do? The only thing that matters is what it does. At the end of the day, unfortunately, since a lot of us don't get paid necessarily that way, that's a big deal by us. We talk about that a lot. I want it to take less time. You can do your job in 4 hours and go home and give your results and take it. Efficiency, boring solutions is one of my favorite things to say. We love boring solutions. If this is a no glamour, not complex thing, it's the right thing. That gets us that 80-20 rule every time. And if you look at what we do, we may not be the most mature in any given space, but we're sure playing in all. Right? That's what we do. We've gotten across the whole SDLC using that efficiency model. And then diversity. You know, this whole thing has too long been a concept of race, of gender. Okay? I think that's table stakes these days. I want to see people just thinking differently. I've been part of too many teams of people that think like me. I can't have that anymore. I need new inputs. I need people who think different. I really fish for that in interviews now. That's one of my things. And with 53 countries, can I tell you it gets easier? Right? You never know what somebody's going to say. There was a guy last week who built a yurt. He lived in Australia and built a yurt. And he was joining GitLab, and I'm like, I got to talk to that guy. I want to know what that's like. What's he going to bring to the table? I have no idea. But it'll be fun. Iteration, that's kind of a no-brainer. Transparency, this one's kind of interesting. A lot of people don't know this. GitLab is fully transparent by default. So if you ever want to see what our strategy is for the next year, you can go on our website. If you want to see our roadmap, our quarterly goals, if you want to go in our handbook and see what kind of computer I get when I start, or try to calculate out how much money I make in my salary, you can do that. A little creepy sometimes. This is so transparent that our competitors are actually making suggestions to edits on our website because everyone can contribute is our mantra. And they literally are. Microsoft submitted some change requests for us. I tell you, that's been interesting, being this transparent, and GitHub got swallowed. They're watching, right? But this has endeared customers to us in a way that nothing else has. People love this to the tune of 2.5 million users, right? That is where they're getting attracted to us. 9 times out of 10, when I get somebody on the phone and say, what brought you to GitLab? If it's not somebody else who's at GitLab, another GitLabber, if you will, it is, I looked in your handbook and it told me how you guys run your POCs, and that blew me away. Like, if you're willing to give me that much information, what else will you give me? Cool, all right, let's do this. Okay, I presented this, by the way, to a couple of pretty good-sized equipment manufacturers. Think Fortune 10 auto, Fortune 50 heavy equipment manufacturers. And got a, whoa, 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 shut the whole presentation down. How in the world do you do that? Talk about it? No. We moved on, okay? Think about the inputs you can get from this. Oh my gosh, customers will give you everything. That's not idea solicitation. That's customers close to the code. Man, we get stuff to the tune of like 15,000 contributions of ideas that people have to make incremental improvements. Really fast moving stuff. And it's different from the idea of, here's something I think would enhance your product. So how much can you give away? That's the question. These are the three, when I pull it out, that make the most difference for me every day. One is collaboration. I mentioned collaborating closer to the code. Kubernetes made it easy for us to be able to spin up web apps at a moment's notice before the code is ever committed. If you're not doing something like that today, consider it. Right? Spinning up a review means product management can now be included in a code review. The security team could be included in every code review. Just trying to make it a little more branding, right? And make sure that the stuff we're sending out isn't waiting for an approval someplace. We're seeing this start to happen a lot. I'll give you a case study on it in just a minute. Diversity, talked about that. That's changing everything. I love it. Every new person I bring in with a new thought process makes the machine run better. And then the transparency thing. And here, the transparency thing, the developers own more and more of this, don't they? Every day, the developer owns a little bit more code, a little more of this process. There's more stuff coming to them all the time. I'm always amazed by how much, well, just run the security test. Just run the QA stuff. You'll be right. Right? The load keeps coming. There's got to be a way to help them be able to continue to move fast and have visibility to the context of their work. And that's not hard to do, but you have to have the right tools and the right processes in place. Otherwise, you're still going to be full of silos. They don't like silos. All right, I love this background picture. It's one of my favorites. It also tells me we're almost done. Right. So 2 things that can crush your culture. If you're taking old components of your culture, like these RVs, and you're building ladders between them, you might be a redneck, right? No, legacy mindset and legacy tooling are the 2 things that are causing us the most pain trying to move cloud native, because we're still trying to design things the wrong way. We're still trying to use too many tools that we're adapted to but not built for. There's a story here that I've got for you. One of the top financial companies that we work with had an engineer start, a DevOps engineer, about a month ago, started. Went out for lunch, never came back. That's interesting, right? Finally get a hold of him, and he says, look, I walked in the door, realized what I was going to be working on. It's a death knell for my career. I can't get stuck on this legacy garbage. Your tools are too archaic. I'm out of here. Now, here's the interesting thing. Since I heard that story, I've heard it 4 more times. 4, I don't like your tool set. It's too old. I'm not working on this. My career is moving too fast for this. So, if you find yourself stuck in internal heavy tooling, consider the future of your hiring efforts. It's going to get harder, because these are the stories I'm starting to hear. The other one here, too, that I want to point out is this decentralized versus centralized thing. Okay, that's the whole idea of we used Subversion for so long and we moved to Git. Why did Git get 90% of the market? It's not that awesome a tool underneath the covers. I'm sorry, I can find holes in that thing all day long. It's cool, but I can blow holes in it all over the place functionally. But that whole decentralized thing made all the difference in the world. It caused us to be efficient. It let us work offline. It let us work in different scenarios that we didn't have before. It opened new doors. And because of that, all these other things follow right behind it. As part of that legacy mindset, when we open up those new channels, if I can work it right here, what can the cloud offer me as part of that service that I talked about earlier? All right. Story time. Axway. I like these guys because I worked with them from day one about 15 months ago. Met them for the first time. They were doing annual deploys of their code to their customers. Customers get code once a year on a CD-ROM. I wish I made this. It we started working with them and said, okay, what are we going to do about this? So it may not seem like much, right? Because a lot of times, we talked earlier about every half second Amazon's deploying code. This was 26, so they went to bi-weekly deploys. Here's the cool thing. They went from bare metal servers and virtual machines straight to the world of Kubernetes and a whole revised process. Now, when they did that, that enabled them to develop a stronger CI program, right? They did a lot more comprehensive testing, more secure code, all that good stuff. When they could deliver faster, though, and the customers heard, oh, you're using Kubernetes, and here's the thing that's not the case study, one more nugget for you tonight. Their customers went, wait, you're playing with Kubernetes? Could you possibly deliver the code differently to us? Because we're all using Kubernetes already. We're waiting for you to catch up. Now their code goes out through a Helm repository. Yeah. They've got a registry. They've got a repository set up. And they're deploying things as Helm charts. Okay? This all happened within like 6 to 8 months. So now their customers are like, wow, one release a year to 26, and it's a one-click install. And I don't have to find a machine with a CD-ROM in it. Great. This is the kind of transformation we're starting to see. And this is the stuff that gets to excite me every single day. Because the way that they work now is completely different. And a byproduct of this with their culture has been that they're able to hire more people. They have a whole group of young people that have run to them once they started using these tools. And they're finding that their entire way that they work is sprung to new life. So really excited. I had another call with them just a couple weeks ago, and they're just knocking it out of the park. It's great stuff. And on that note, I'll stop talking. Is this at all what anybody expected to be hearing tonight? And I told you, there's nothing architecturally here for you, right? There's just ideas, thoughts, things that I'm seeing happening out there. And I hope, you heard a nugget someplace tonight that you can take back and noodle on tomorrow when you're sitting at your desk drumming a pencil. Does anybody have a pencil to use? Is that still a thing? All right, cool.
Questions? I have a question.
Yeah.
How do you guys manage asynchronous and Slack together? Because the main push behind Slack is synchronous communication, right? Whereas asynchronous could be location cover. How does that work together?
Yeah, so, we are full remote, right? We have no main office, so everything has to be communicated virtually. As such, our policy is that despite the fact that Slack enables synchronous communication, those who can communicate synchronously will, but we still have an asynchronous communication policy. Now, in most cases, people who are working together on teams are within a certain geography, and so we do get really steady groups of people that can work together. So that is working okay. We're starting to see some interesting cracks in that as we scale, right? Because it is pretty hard to keep like my buddy Zhao Gang in China. Me communicating with him on a regular basis, we look for that overlap when he's coming online and I'm getting offline at the end of the day, because we know if he's got questions, he's going to come right away. So we target that, but the async thing really is what dominates our work. Even in Slack, if the bubbles are there, we don't have to answer. We're encouraged to turn the app off on our phone at night, because people like me were too dumb to turn it off, and then it dinged and buzzed all night. I was like, I gotta answer this, right? And so, for the sake of work-life balance, we do keep that. Now, one exception to that, and that is people like AJ and I are in sales, right? We have to be on when the customer's on. Yeah. So that keeps us moving pretty easily. Development's different. So yeah, we do really adhere more to the async policy. Admittedly, can cause us some problems sometimes. We do have this, escalation procedures for sometimes.
How do y'all deal with on-call situations?
On-call is a little different. We do have software for managing that, like support, right? They're using things like Zendesk. They do have full escalation procedures. We are, 24-hour support. So we do have means to find people when we need them. But
The support is actually global.
Okay.
Yeah, support.
Exactly.
We talk about being in countries, it's not just sales people, it's developers, support people. So we literally from every single time zone across the globe, and there is a support person on all the time.
Right.
So they're triaging things, right? And then as they go offline, everything audited and captured, handout procedures are in place for the next support person they have to hand off. And customers actually respond very well to that. If they're on the phone with a support person and they're still triaging and they leave for some reason, tag, you're it.
Follow the sun.
Yeah.
Right? Actually happens. They're off board and
Yeah, so we do follow the sun, but then of course there's always overlap, right?
Yeah.
There's always those situations.
Right.
We do what we need to do.
So, internal, I'm curious, does your organization operate on a cradle-to-grave model? Or is it because you're DevOps and there's always this argument on you build it, you maintain it, you bury it. Or is it a more of an SRE where you have this skill, second, organization within the company and handoff and you focus primarily on build? Because I'm in model, I'm in a legacy company, and we are struggling to balance, speed and agility with the realities of all of the red tape and everything else.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because realistically, the product that we're building is still monolithic. That's core. We are not building this in a cloud-native way. Most of the customers we're working with are turning to that model, but we're not there ourselves. And so we are more than a cradle-to-grave type of model right now. However, most of the application that we put together, very few things have had to be deprecated. Almost everything we've put together so far, we're still in growth mode. So we haven't hit that pain threshold yet, which is going to be interesting, right? Because we know it's coming. But there's a few things. What's interesting is we have a corporate summit every 9 months. The whole company together in one location and talk through things. One of those topics every 9 months is, what do we kill? We have a room that people sign up for. They get together in that room and just say, what do we kill? And we say, this is something that's not used. Let's get some data on this. And we start to pull those components out of the application if they're not seeing the usage. We're not doing a lot of that yet, but I suspect we'll be doing more of that model. That has become an interesting thing that I don't miss. All right, I make sure I'm in that one because I want to know what people are trying to kill off and I'll get my customer perspective on it. But yeah, it's tough.
Apologies, this is a little too granular for the topic at hand, but when we start thinking about global zones slide, you mentioned use tokens for scaled web session data management.
Yeah.
As opposed to
Session stores. Yeah. If you're using session stores, you're syncing all those sessions all the time. And the whole token thing is I just need to make sure that I'm passing that token and exchanging that data occasionally. I don't have to sync all the sessions, just moving the data on that one session with the token. So there's something about the whole syncing of the sessions that's causing a lot of grief out there with all the different applications for getting online. So.
We go back just a couple slides to I think it was the RV slide, the trailer slide.
Sure. Let me turn it back on.
There was a bullet point that caught my attention. Security versus headline. Can you talk about that one a little bit?
Yes, I can. So the legacy mindset, when we are in conversations about security is in its own silo in about 80% of organizations right now. Those organizations are the ones who are ending up on the front of CNN telling people to change their passwords. That's all that refers to.
Gotcha.
Right? So the less siloed security is, the more frequently we're running security scans, even if it's, you know, Pareto principle again, back to the, we're running something before we get to a full extensive test. At least we're staying ahead of this.
Yeah.
Right.
You had kind of that little bit of a recurring theme in several of these that talk about like service mesh versus architecture and delivering value versus architecture. Where does architecture fit into, you know, the process? That's good.
Yeah, where does architecture fit is the right question. So architecture's always got its place, right? I mean, I'm not going to be the one who walks up to a systems architect and says, hey, guess what? You're not relevant, right? That's a mistake. I think what we're starting to see, though, is that the whole idea of what we've done in the past to architect our solutions has been more around the scale of the solution and not revolutionary ways. It's been evolutionary, not revolutionary, if that makes sense. So when we're talking about architectures, have we stopped looking at the applications we're using today and said, look, what if we stopped feeding this beast and did something entirely different? What would that look like? And I know we have those conversations sometimes, but we still kind of end up back in a conversation about a big, heavy architecture. Like I said, here's the little miniature architectures that are popping up all over the place. You know, have you had those kind of conversations? Have you looked at what a serverless model would do for you from an architectural perspective? That's a different decision process, and we focus less on the scale of the architecture and more on the function of the architecture. And realistically, when we're not building for scale so much because we're leveraging the tools at hand, and we're building more for the architectural prowess, right? It's the intensity of that architecture to do the right things. We spend less time in architecture discussions. That's what we're starting to see. So what has been a long lead time process is now becoming shorter when we can leverage these services correctly in the cloud.
You mentioned in there, sorry, I can follow up.
Yeah. Yep.
The Kubernetes side of it. For most organizations, that is a big, heavy piece of architecture.
Oh, yes. It's a horrible thing sometimes.
So who, you know, were you to say that was a correct solution to your given problem, you know, who and how do you bring that into the organization?
So, Kubernetes. Kubernetes. All right. Here's my take on Kubernetes. If you look at what people say about Kubernetes that were the originators on Kubernetes, they'll say it's not a development tool, right? There's a lot of power in using Kubernetes, but there's also so many different flavors of it out there that the level of effort you need to put in to deploy things is going to vary wildly depending on what deployment you're using, what variant you're using. So, case in point, Google's Kubernetes engine is the easiest thing I've used, by far, right? It has simplified my cluster creation, it has simplified my network, it has simplified my DNS entries. Everything that I've needed to do has worked pretty efficiently with that. There are other variants in other clouds, who I may not mention at the moment, who just have been very, very difficult for us to work with, right? The networking alone is cripplingly difficult. So I think the answer is Kubernetes is making our lives easier from a deployment perspective, but from a setup perspective, we're not quite there yet in most major cloud products. I think it's going to come soon because I'm seeing some drastic improvements. But if you're trying to go it alone, it's painful. Absolutely agree. I don't know if that answers your question. But you know, the architecture, I think there's two things I see people doing wrong with Kubernetes. One is they're trying to do too much of it themselves. They're not letting the cloud manage it for them. When they do that, it's much more heavy and much more difficult. Unless you got somebody that really knows what they're doing, and I have not found too many people who are certified that know what they're doing. right? It's really, really hard. We get every day, can you help me adopt Kubernetes? I can help you deploy clusters and utilize it in a great way with GitLab. That's what I can do. If you want me to optimize your production systems, I can't do that for you. That's your discussion with your team. So that's thing one. I think thing two is we're seeing people just jump to it and use it very irrationally. And they're spinning up cluster after cluster after cluster and getting massive builds from it. So there's, the other side of that is, if you're going to use those things, make sure that there's a structure around it that limits the way that it's used, so that not everybody's spinning up the clusters. I got a call the other day, I cannot get my review apps to work within GitLab. And we looked at it and found that they were simply out of IPs. They used them all. Everything, their entire, Google system, every allocation was gone. We started looking at their clusters, and people just kind of, hey, I need a cluster, right?
Would you recommend they use Kubernetes on-premise before, get savvy at it before jumping to the cloud?
No. No. Setting it up is so painful. Setting up is so painful. If you're going to leverage it, now one thing I can recommend is before you move your production architecture into it, play with it in smaller staging type environments. And while you're modeling what it's going to look like, right? Start just doing something simple. Spin up individual pods. Make sure you got that working up and down. Make sure that whatever you're using to deploy to that environment is made to work with Kubernetes. That's the other thing that's really, really hard, right? If you can't see the pods and understand how many pods are active for you, if you can't see the stuff being spun up and coming back down, you're running blind. You can go back into the interface for GKE or for whatever. Where did all this come from, right? I want you to be able to see all that stuff in a different place. I want you to be able to put this on a dashboard someplace and understand what's going on in your system. So that's, I think, another piece of this is if you don't have visibility into those environments, but start small. Start small. Start everything single pod, right? And then start spinning up a couple pods. Try multi-environment type stuff. You can do that small before you really jump into the pod on Kubernetes. And yeah.
So I haven't tried Fargate, but I did try. So I'm kind of to that point. There's one question. Fargate. I kind of looked at it. I didn't do as well. So I have tried the GCP. So that's kind of one thing. I think of Google as the container company, and then I think of AWS as a serverless company.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious in your paradigm on how those are going to get duke it out or add those work towards different use cases that you see available.
Yeah, interesting, right? Because as big as Knative is, and it being the kind of the originator of the interests that I had on the serverless side of things, Lambda is just crushing them. Right? However, when I get under the covers on adoption, actual adoption of serverless, it's really, 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 really leading both ways. There's not many people making that work. I think there's a fortune in savings out there in the future if it's leveraged correctly. But Lambda has all the interest. Boy, Fargate we're starting to hear, I'm not hearing a lot yet though. It comes up, but then it doesn't keep coming up. People look at it, but the adoption is kind of creeping along, is my perception of it. Containers, yeah, I mean, yeah, EC2 is still kind of the go-to out there for everybody. When I look at what Google's doing, I think they're doing it right. They have the interfaces that work killer, right? Their product is the most liquid, but their market share is still pretty low.
What about Azure Functions?
Azure Functions doesn't really come up for us right now. We hear a lot about AKS, right? But Azure Functions is not something I'm hearing much about. There's some maturity issues there, is what I was told. I don't have any insight to that. That's just what I was told recently, that it wasn't quite there for the folks that were looking at it. May or may not be true. Your mileage may vary. Void were prohibited. How many disclaimers can I put on that one? Yeah.
The question is to go back to the architecture. I think another slide you mentioned less architecture, more the value.
Yeah.
So what's value? And also you also mentioned this service mesh. Can you elaborate that more?
Yeah. So the point I'm trying to make there is, historically, we spent so much time trying to focus on designing our architecture for scale. Yeah. And the reality is we have to get creative with our architecture. And part of the way we can get creative is to focus on communication methods with something like a service mesh versus focusing strictly on our architecture. Right? The more we can connect things together through a mesh, the easier it is for us to start thinking differently about our architectures and not have to focus on building the whole system up front. Designing a whole system up front, right? Have you looked at, when you architect the system, historically we've been like, here's what we need, let's go, right? It's 9 times out of 10 when I have these discussions, we're still building the architecture in a waterfall way. With some of the new things that we're working with here, you can start to look at things differently and break that out into more iterative parallel development. Okay, so you can focus less on the architecture time up front, where you're racking your brain about how do I design the whole system, and focus more on efficient ways to roll that system out, and then your customers will obtain value quicker from that. And that's kind of the general theme underneath that. Now, there's a reason why I'm speaking to this ambiguously, and that is because every application in this room is different, right? The more e-commerce based or web based your application is, the quicker and easier it is to do this, right? The less you have that, the more difficult this can be. And so I'm speaking to it generically on purpose. Hope that makes sense.
Another way that our team looks at this is basically to say what allows us to optimize on the things that we need to deliver for the business. Mm-hmm. And we're actually quite far down the serverless approach using the AWS platform for that, and Lambda is a big part of that. And what we find is that more and more we're looking for tools that will say we don't have to worry about managing whatever the case may be, configurations or things like that. We can totally focus on this is what the business needs, and here's how we deliver that, and we don't have to worry as much about the underlying infrastructure. And that's a huge win.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, your application, does it have a lot of social relevance?
Social media?
Yeah, like a social media, like lots of visual components to it or anything like that. Okay, cool.
A lot of back-end automation stuff.
Okay, yeah. So the back-end thing is the common use case I hear, but 9 times out of 10 it's been tied to something social, like it's converting thumbnails, images to thumbnails in the background. Something along those lines is what I keep finding people using it for. So I'm looking for those new models where somebody's found a way to actually leverage that for something other than, cute puppy dog pictures.
Right. Yeah. No, ours is, we definitely have a UI in front of it, and it's for a security product. So, okay.
But you're able to use serverless, though, as the core, so you have to spend less time architecting that solution because it scales horizontally.
Well, and a lot of things you're talking about too. We're not worried about performance, right? Because you look for tools, and Kubernetes is a great example. You look for tools that will, assuming that you're not abusing them, they will probably handle your scaling just fine, right? And I don't have to think about that anymore. So I can talk with my product manager and say, well, here's the new feature that I've been talking to customers about and dying to have. And I don't have to then have a conversation with 3 different teams about how do we get the equipment, how do we do it. There's none of that. It's like, great, we can deliver that.
Yeah, another example of this is, it's a little different, but so the way GitLab runs the CI jobs on GitLab.com is a similar model. It's an auto-scale model. So at any given time, we actually have public dashboards. You can come and see how our runners are doing executing your jobs for you. At any given time, there might be 1,500 jobs. There might be 10,000 jobs running simultaneously. That's all spinning up and down inside of Google, right? We're not doing any of that. It's all just triggered and off it goes. We don't care about that. The only time I have to care about it is when I've got a queuing problem of some kind, and that's on my architecture. Right? So, but we've also found ways that, hey, when the queue gets past X number, we spin up another server. So we can spin up more runners and off it goes. So, it's hands-off architecture. That is the goal. Your mileage may vary.
Yes, still, that's I think you gave a very good point. You want some business function to go that way. That's one major issue is right now we want to deliver many things in a container. It makes sense. So it's not dependent on others. But is there any potential issues we actually duplicate many effort? It could be shared if we design and actually better ways. So this is actually the same, right? We don't need to every team to do the same or similar things, but with slightly different ways.
Sometimes, right? Sometimes we do run into that. However, if we've architected our microservices correctly, or if we've architected our service mesh correctly, like the way we're going to interface and communicate with everything, a lot of times we can say, hey, look, here's either you're creating a new source code repository, right? Maybe here's the core template, here's the core components you're going to need to tie into that existing architecture. Or right away, here are the CI jobs that are going to run every time. So when you build your code and build your application, these are the first things that are going to be looked at. Is it going to communicate correctly into the existing architecture? Is it going to be secure, etc.? So when we do those things, we're typically leveraging existing systems, so we don't have to recreate the wheel.
Right.
If you've planned properly, we'll have less duplication, right? It comes back to that. Eventually, that part of the process becomes something we have to talk about. But that, realistically, it's not.
Example, we found, okay, to create many different kind of services with different repo, code repo, but actually many code is just copy over and make some slight difference. It may gradually make it difficult to maintain and grow. Right?
Yeah.
So that your GitLab how to tackle that.
For us, we've separated that out. Our teams are they're playing together on a regular basis. However, we do break it out by functional groups, where we do expect that the overlap will be minimal, right? The folks who are working on source code management, the people who are working on the pipeline management, they understand the system they need to integrate to, right? There's a core system they have to tie into, but the reality is they're not taking each other's code and copying it along. We've drawn pretty defined lines there of places that we can work together and still not have to copy any code across. I think that's the thing we try to avoid. If that makes sense. It's just the architecture of our system. Now, we have that in our favor because it's so broad, right? That GitLab does all this crazy different variety of things, so it's easy for us to say, you're doing static application testing, you're doing dynamic application testing, you're doing CI jobs, you're doing CD jobs, and we can separate it out around the functionality easily. The more monolithic your application is, the harder that gets to do. The planning thing becomes critical in that case. You really do have to plan carefully around that.
Next.
So I see you mentioning, like 80% of the time Amazon and then Google, not Azure at all. But aren't you seeing customers that wants to be or cloud agnostic, right? Yes. They don't want to be hostage to Amazon or to Google or to Microsoft.
Yes.
Or they want to be in all clouds because they need to be everywhere.
Exactly right. So yes, we are running into Azure for sure, right? We're not running into it as much as the others. Reason being, I think, is because Microsoft bought our top competitor. Seems to dampen some of our conversations. But that said, yeah, we are. It's one of the things that we actually like about GitLab right now is we can quickly plug in Kubernetes clusters, EKS, AKS, and GKE. Right? I can take all three of those major clouds and then some, and plug them in and target all those environments. We are one of the multi-cloud vendors that remain. Right? So we're pretty excited about that.
There's a service out there, a company that's doing utility-based cloud managed shifting of workloads for commodity-based services.
Yeah.
So like I expect that's probably going to be something that starts to make some serious traction from a cost perspective.
Yeah, yeah. There's a couple of those that have popped up now. I don't know where you're from. But yeah, that's definitely it's the multi-cloud thing kind of popped up out of nowhere recently. It's this hot button item, right? I heard about it, but now it seems like there's a lot of people talking about it.
So from the enterprise perspective, OpEx costs not very appealing.
No.
Reduction of that in mass, which brings that utility concept into play. It seems to be very
Yeah. So I don't know how many of you paid attention to the Lyft IPO recently. Lyft's announced their cloud commitment that they've got in place for the next 2 years. It's a couple $1 million a month, something like that. There was some gargantuan number that they are contractually obligated to pay, and they had to announce that as part of the IPO. Like, look, sorry, it's going to be like 50 million less. It's all going to cloud compute because that's
all going to AWS. It's all going to Amazon.
It is. Yeah.
Now,
I can guarantee you after other conversations with them, they may be looking at multi-cloud solutions.
do you think that the multi-cloud thing that you said that popped up recently may have something to do with the issue that Amazon had with S3 when that went down and
Yeah.
yeah. You think that, that they don't want to have all their eggs in one basket, so let's do multi-cloud and...
I think there's a couple of things happening. One is cost control. I think people are waiting for the cloud wars to begin, and they just haven't, right? It's a very rich, very costly environment, and people haven't architected their solutions to take advantage of it yet. Once people start architecting their solutions to take advantage of it and go multi-cloud, they'll be able to shift their workloads toward points of cheaper compute. Right? So we see people doing this with spot instances on AWS today when they're spinning up their CI jobs. They look for low-cost spot instances and spin up their servers there, run the CI jobs, and shut them back down. Right? So I think you're going to start seeing some of that, the optimization of cloud. There is, of course, things like, hey, my availability zone goes down. Realistically, it shouldn't be a problem. That's the way it's designed, but could it be? Sure, it could be. The other thing is just the vendor specificness of it. We have this all the time. The conversations I have about being vendor locked in, right? There's not a lot of trust in the enterprise that one vendor is going to give them everything they need. Right. I get that all the time. Just with GitLab.
Yeah.
Everybody's worried about vendor lock-in. I get my data back. So, yeah, there's a lot going on there. And I think the other thing is, too, usage patterns. We are dealing with the cloud, right? The reality is there's data being mined from this by our cloud providers all the time. So if we mix it up a little bit, we're probably a little bit safer. There's that mentality out there. I don't think people know exactly why yet, but that right? What is it? What's the outcome of that going to be? But it's something that I'm hearing that people are paying attention to. It's just the security of their data and their patterns.
What I'm noticing is the increase in hybrid needs with data center as well as cloud, where you support the regular workloads on data center and then adopt needs on cloud and extend hybrid. With Kubernetes clusters, like you can do both.
Yeah, like a hybrid approach. Yeah. Yeah, I'm seeing some of that done today. It really depends on the environment, right? So I think the bigger the organization, the higher tendency to do something like that. Some of the smaller organizations we're seeing, they don't want to touch any of their own infrastructure anymore. So
it's a mixture of the environment and the actual enterprise, what they're doing, what their needs are.
absolutely. Yeah, and you know, how legacy is the application, what's the new thing you're doing? And I mean, to your point, right, Black Friday type events.
Yeah.
What is your Black Friday? You know, I think of Southwest servers. What are they doing to keep up with it's 24 hours, check out?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's happening all the time. What does that look like for them? Do they have some kind of compute system set up around that? Would multi-cloud help them with that? No idea. I don't know how many times that happens, right? It's a lot of hit on the infrastructure. Hope it auto scales.
Well, thank you very much, Joel, for coming out and talking to us. It's been a pleasure. And if anybody has any more questions, wants to stick around, you're happy to do so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.